What's up, wave makers? It's me, Mommy Suna. I don't know what I tried to do there, but it didn't work out. On last week's anti-MLM subreddit review, we came across a post called MLM on Resume. This wasn't the one that I posted on Tuesday of this week, the one that you just watched a few days ago. This was last week. But anyway, I thought that this would be a good discussion to have. I will say that my original opinion on this has kind of shifted and swayed a little bit from when I initially brought it up in my video. So please save your opinions and your comments until the end of this video. I'm not here to sway you either way. I'm just here to present what I've found regarding this topic. And it's interesting. You know, things can go both ways. So here's what the original Reddit post said. Am I being too harsh? As an employer, if I see someone put an MLM job on their resume, and they usually add their ridiculous rank as their title, it's an automatic no pile. I feel that putting MLM experience on there shows that the candidate makes poor decisions, and also, they obviously haven't learned how poor of a decision they made if they put it on a resume. In addition, in my opinion, MLMs provide no valuable training, and I don't want to risk hiring someone who may still be enticed by an MLM and try to bring that crap into my company. Your thoughts? First of all, if there's one thing that we can agree on here is that this person, this OP, is not the only hiring manager in the whole wide world who feels this way. I guarantee that there are many other people who are in charge of hiring who are also anti-MLM and would see this the same way. This is a real world situation that should be considered when applying for a new job, especially if you have MLM experience in your background. So I'd like to go through some of the key arguments for and against the idea of an MLM no pile, including some of your guys' comments as well. So first of all, what do people have to say in defense of this? The biggest argument that I've seen is that it's either list your MLM or have a gap in employment on your resume, which can have a bad look. Employers see gaps in employment as a red flag because of what might lie in those gaps. You know, was the applicant in jail for a certain amount of time? Were they just being lazy? People's minds can obviously just immediately assume the worst, you know? I did a little bit of digging, and from what I can come up with, employers say it's a better idea to explain the gap in your employment than to just leave it empty. And it's safe to assume that if you don't mention the gap, that the employers are going to find out about it anyway by doing like a background check or a basic employment check. So it's best to briefly explain the gap in 2 lines or less. This is a big reason why many ex-MLMers will put it on a resume. It's so that they don't have a gap there. It does explain having a gap in employment. And this depends on how you view MLMs, but like some might consider it to be a failed business. I would say more so it's like a failed business venture, but not an actual business, you know what I mean? Some employers say that having a failed business on your resume isn't necessarily bad, because you may have achieved some things during that business venture of yours, and if you have something to offer from that business venture, you're more than welcome to put that on your resume and say, hey, I learned this from this failed business experience. Here are the things I did. Here are the things I was successful at, you know? And a lot of those skills that you may have learned can apply to whatever job you're applying for next, you know? In an MLM's case, like I said earlier, there's an oh so common argument of, do you own your own business if you're with an MLM? And that's something that needs to be considered. I'll jump into that argument in a second, but if you've been here for a while, you pretty much know where I stand on this. Probably a lot of you feel the same way. But let's say, for example, that you're part of the 1% with Avon for 20 years, and you had a team underneath you where other people found success underneath you as well. I mean, that could be fair to say that you gained some kind of leadership skills or something like that from that experience. If you made any like significant sales by yourself while you were with Avon, I mean, that can be sales experience. Of course, this is all very situational. If you spent 6 months in Monet and never accomplished anything, like, I don't think it'd be fair to say that you gained any skills at all from it. Maybe you gained some kind of enlightenment, but I guess that wouldn't be fitting for a job resume. But I mean, a 6-month employment gap, I guess it's safe to say that there should be an explanation regardless. Maybe you could say something like, I had a failed business venture where I learned a lot about myself and I'm ready to move on from that experience and I'll never do it again. Let's talk about the whole, is an MLM rep a business owner argument? Think of this part as more like putting MLMs on your resume etiquette. So the top comment on the original Reddit Reddit post that we were talking about links to a blog called Ask a Manager, where someone is asking if it's acceptable for an ex-MLM rep to say that they were a business owner on their resume. The short answer to this question is no, you can't say that. The writer here says that normally maybe you shouldn't put MLM experience on a resume because of the strong stigma against them. But if you feel it's necessary to do so, just make sure that you use the proper terminology, because at the end of the day, you were a sales rep at best. You are not a business owner. By law, MLM reps are considered independent contractors, not business owners. I think you still have to file as like self-employed or something like that. I don't really know. I didn't make money in my MLMs, so I have no idea. By law, they're not even considered business owners, so I don't think that you can put that you owned your own business for whatever period of time if you were with an MLM, because business owners have experience in things like setting their own pricing, making brand decisions, developing and manufacturing products, you know, stuff like that. And you can't say that you have any hiring experience either, because recruiting is not the same thing as hiring. I mean, even if you were a franchisee, you should still be considered a business owner, because you're still responsible for paying your employees' wages and making schedules and delegating workloads, hiring, firing, promoting, things like that. So no, when you're involved in an MLM, you don't have any experience in any of those things. You can't consider yourself a business owner if you don't know how to do any of those things, because yeah, you weren't one. You weren't a business owner at all. Now, if an MLM rep were to use the term business owner instead of sales rep, according to the author of this Ask a Manager blog post, hiring managers might find that to be an overinflated statement and either assume that you're naive about what owning a business actually means, or if you're just trying to inflate your place in the company to a ridiculous degree. And of course, the article also mentions that there are plenty of hiring managers out there who are aware of MLMs and how they work, and seeing the term business owner is just going to make them go, even without seeing the name of the company, they're just, you know, gonna associate the term business owner with the scam that MLMs are. So going back to what we were talking about previously, if you feel the need to use your MLM experience on a resume to explain your gap in employment, just make sure you're using the term sales rep instead of business owner, and maybe offer an explanation like we talked about before. And to finish off this discussion about using it to explain an employment gap, let it be known that there are other acceptable reasons to have an employment gap, such as being a stay-at-home parent. So like, for example, if you're a stay-at-home mom and you're like, I'm gonna join this MLM for some extra money on the side, it's perfectly acceptable to just be like, hey, I wasn't employed for this long because I was a stay-at-home mom. Like, you don't even have to mention that you were in the MLM, you know? If you have a socially acceptable reason, like even like an illness or an injury or something like that, like those are socially acceptable things to explain why you have a gap in employment. It doesn't matter if you join an MLM during those times because you just were desperate for a side income while you were out of work. It's irrelevant. You don't have to include that. But the main point is that the employers just need to know that you were unemployed because you had like a good reason, not because you were in jail or something. Alessandra Iora left the following comment on my video regarding her opinion on the matter. I would give someone with an MLM on their resume a chance, but I would definitely ask them about it and gauge their response. I wouldn't want to rule out the possibility that they're putting it on their resume to show that they were occupied during a period of time, so there isn't a gap on their resume. But definitely in an interview, I would ask about the experience and why/if they left. That will tell you what you need to know. I think this is respectable. Of course, if you're gonna put MLM experience on your resume, expect to need to answer some questions. Whether it's why did you leave or what did you learn? Assume that every employer knows what an MLM is, and if they're willing to give you a chance and interview you, they're gonna want to know the details. They're gonna want to make sure that you're not gonna fall for that again. Lucille Sawtot left the following comment, and this was in response to another commenter on my video. It depends on how long the MLM journey has lasted. I mean, if a person has dedicated his or herself to an MLM for 6 months, he or she has to explain the gap in the resume, and I'm uncomfortable of blasting an application because someone has made a mistake. With this type of reason, an ex-Hun cannot find another job and will be stuck in the MLM world. So I think that's more important to think it's not the MLM on the resume, but what the person says about it. And this is definitely a good point. Are we to hold every person who's ever been in an MLM responsible for this mistake? Especially if that mistake was made because they may have been manipulated or lied to. Personally, I don't think so. I mean, I think people can learn and grow from their experiences, and if you get called in and you describe your MLM experience experience as something that you don't want to be involved with again, but you also learned a lot from being involved, like learned about managing your expectations and realistic key takeaways and stuff like that, I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with that, but that's just my personal opinion. There were a few Reddit commenters who said something along the lines of where they work, they require that all work history be stated no matter how short or inconsequential the employment was. So this is a realistic situation to consider. Places like this might see a gap in employment and then automatically put you in a no pile there. And they won't even give you a chance to explain why you had that gap. So these employers probably see MLMs on resumes a lot. So it might not be as risky as a move under that circumstance. But again, if you can explain that gap with another acceptable excuse, that seems to be the safer route. Okay, so let's jump to the other side now. Everything we just discussed is kind of the best case scenario. You put the MLM on your resume with the intention of describing a gap in employment. The hiring manager wants to hear you out. You're able to explain yourself. That's great. But is it realistic all the time in every situation? Personally, I don't believe it is, and many commenters on Reddit and on my video don't seem to think so either. It's safe to assume that the person who receives your resume stamped with MLM experience might be like the OP on this Reddit post. They might see it and have a preconceived notion about you, given your involvement with MLMs and the fact that you put it on your resume, and not even give you a chance. Is this fair? No, I don't think so. But why do these stigmas exist? And why are some hiring managers so unwilling to look past them? I think the general consensus against putting MLM experience on a resume comes down to this. An employer wouldn't judge you for having been in an MLM because mistakes happen, but an employer may judge you for thinking it's a good idea to put your MLM on that resume in the first place. One HR rep on Reddit said that they automatically assume that they're not an intelligent person if they see an MLM on an employment application. To further elaborate on this, Chickpea Pasta had this to say in my video comments. I completely agree with the OP about the MLM on a resume. I would also add that the fact that they included the MLM on their resume is not only unprofessional, but it also shows that they haven't learned their lesson. If they're applying for a job, they must not have made money from their MLM. Surprise, surprise. So they haven't learned that they were scammed by their MLM and are clearly not embarrassed. If they can be manipulated by an MLM and not realize it, that person lacks common sense and should not be hired or trusted to do most jobs. I mean, I think this is kind of a fair assumption to make. If an MLM is listed on a resume, especially if it wasn't for a long period of time, could it be because the person didn't necessarily learn from their mistake? Are they unashamed of their involvement in the MLM? Some may say that the MLM being on the resume in the first place shows that they don't see anything wrong with their involvement in the first place in that kind of business, and it can bring up questions of morality and ethics. Lore Master Talisar left me this comment. I think that yes, people can learn from the mistakes of being in an MLM. My sister sure did. She got sucked into Mary Kay and definitely had the self-awareness to realize that she made a mistake and has never repeated it. But not everyone is as willing to face their own failures, perceived or otherwise, and easily gets sucked right back into another one or sticks with the same one and just doubles down on it. I would not fault someone for having been in an MLM in the past and realizing their mistake and trying to find an actual job after that. However, to put your MLM on a resume, that does show a lack of shame and awareness. If asked in an interview why they had a seeming lapse in employment and they told me they got sucked into an MLM during that time, I wouldn't fault them. But for that to be put on a resume as experience, yeah, that's going to be a no for me. Unwillingness to face your own failures is a pretty good point. If the MLM is used as job experience, yeah, see, I guess this goes into like how it's put on the resume, not necessarily that it's there in the first place. Like if the MLM is used as job experience instead of an explanation for a lack of employment, it's safe to say that someone might think that there's a possibility that this person could get sucked into another one because they're clearly unaware that they're involved in something unethical that doesn't even give them any real world skills in the first place, really, in most cases anyway. Here's a comment from Wolfina Foxtail. I would also be concerned that they wouldn't be very dedicated to the job or that they would leave in several months to pursue their dream in the next MLM they join. It takes time and money to properly train someone, and I wouldn't want to risk them just leaving because they found a better opportunity. In response to this, on my research through all this, I've heard mixed reviews about frequent job changes. Some employers say that they appreciate having an employee that may only stay a few years before jumping to another one with a higher wage, because that ambition and desire for something better and unwillingness to become complacent is attractive in a lot of different careers. Obviously, you have to be able to prove that you were switching jobs for a better opportunity, not because I didn't like my boss, or I didn't like my coworkers, or I didn't like the work, or I was being lazy, or shit like that. I mean, and you should be expected to at least stay for a few years. Frequent job changes can also be a red flag to a lot of other employers. So it seems like it's really hit or miss with this one, and it's kind of dependent on the job that you're applying for. One Reddit commenter said the following: "As a hiring manager, I would immediately reject. Any position I would hire for would require critical thinking. If they put it on their resume, it demonstrates that they cannot think critically or evaluate their own biases and behaviors." Again, I think the assumption is not on the fact that the person was in an MLM, but it's more so that they thought it was a good idea to put it on their resume. Knowing what many of us here know about MLMs, I don't think it's too far-fetched to assume something like this. Now, all of this is to say that clearly the route that you should take is based on each individual circumstance. And I'll admit, before I started looking into this, I kind of fell on the side of, oh my god, no, why would you ever put that on a resume? That's not job experience, But I think my opinion has changed a bit. Before all of this, I didn't really understand why someone would feel obligated to put an MLM on a resume, but I do see some situations where it may be the better option. So like for me, I was in 2 MLMs, but I would never put them on a resume. In my situation, I was not unemployed with my regular job while I was in them, so I don't need them to show any kind of gap in employment, and I don't think that I learned anything. I mean, aside from learning everything that I do now on this YouTube channel. As far as real world skills that would help me in the job market and stuff like that, like I would definitely say that I didn't learn any of that shit from being with Gold Canyon and Lime Life. So for me, I guess that's where I was coming from. I was just like, no, I would never put that on a resume. But, if someone quits for 6 months to pursue this dream because their upline said, you need to dedicate yourself, and then it still didn't work out and they need to go get another job, I can see situations where it would be okay to put it on your resume to explain that gap in employment, as long as that is explained as well. Like, hey, I was involved in this thing for 6 months, I kind of got sucked in, I learned this about myself, and I don't plan on being part of another company like this ever again. I've learned my lesson, I just want to move on and grow from this. Like that kind of thing, I feel like that is okay. The people who would give an openly ex-MLMer a chance for an interview are obviously the ones that are a little bit more compassionate. If they want to give someone a chance to explain themselves, maybe, they respect the fact that someone can admit to a mistake they've made and become a better person because of it. And that's kind of where I've always fallen with MLMs. I'm not really a person blamer when it comes to these kind of things, because I've been there. I've been manipulated and preyed upon for being a new mom, and that's how I ended up getting into both of these MLMs. But as long as you come out of those experiences knowing that you were preyed on and manipulated, I think you're good. Obviously, the 1% doesn't fall into this category, because they're usually the ones who are doing all the manipulating and lying. They know exactly what they're doing. They're good at what they do. They're good at lying to people and manipulating people, and they're probably actually pretty good at sales too, most of the time, I would say. So I'm not talking about those people, because they're kind of a lost cause, because they already know what they're doing is wrong, but they still keep doing it because they're making money from it. They wouldn't run off and apply for another job anyway. I'm talking about the other 99% of people. So I guess here's where I fall to finalize all this. If you have a gap in employment, it sounds better to leave an explanation than to leave it blank. If you were doing things during that time while you were in an MLM that are socially acceptable, like being a stay-at-home parent or caring for a loved one, or you were sick or you were injured or something like that, I'd say just lean on that. Don't include the MLM at all. If you don't have any of that to fall back on, include the MLM, but briefly explain that you're not going to join another one and you learned your lesson. If you put the MLM down as legitimate job experience, unless it took up a large portion of time, like as if you were with Avon for 20 years or something like that, where, in that case, you may have actually learned some skills that you can use in regular employment. Unless you're in that situation, I do agree that it does reflect negatively on you, but that's coming from someone who knows how MLMs work and know that they're predatory and gross. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. This was a really interesting topic for me to look into. Again, just like everything that I don't always necessarily know both sides, and it's good to kind of weigh the pros and cons. So after hearing all this, let me know what you guys think. Let me know where you fall, and we can have a discussion about it. It's fun. And with that, let's thank my patrons. The biggest thank you in the whole wide world goes to Amanda McMahon, Corey Allison, Irene Nordid, Michelle Matthews, Unknown System Error, Katrina Rosemarick, Elizabeth Wyatt, Karina Winman, Maria Burchett, Meredith Nakata, Molly Larson, Molly Wasilewski, Rach J, Real Fly Realize, Turd Ferguson, Bobby Boris Geller, Clark Grace, Daniel Urena, Desiree Lopez, E. Higgins, Evan Adler, Hey Felicia 93, JP Eugenio Schaefer, Jackie Waple, Justin Kelsey, Kelly Creffield, Kim Cartwright, Laura Lynn Martin, Maddie Darley, Rachel McHenry, Savannah Karkoskis, Tara Jensen, Tuesday the 13th, Vandus Closet, Cat Loves Things and Stuff, and to the rest of my fabulous patrons. And even if you're not a patron, thank you for being here. Thank you for making it to the end of this video and listening to all this serious talk. We didn't have much laughing and giggling this time around, but I appreciate you being here anyway. Keep making waves, babes, and also with that, keep educating people. Keep spreading the good word, y'all. And I'll smell you later. Mommy Tsunami out.